All right, welcome to RealGM Radio. I'm your host, Wes Goldberg. Today, I'm joined by Adam Mares and Andrew Schlecht for our Northwest Division preview, and I am fired up to share today's show because these guys are two of the best. Nobody covers their teams better or has a pulse on their fan base more than these guys do. So we talk about how the Thunder could build off of last year's championship, how the Nuggets have improved. Adam makes a bold prediction about where the Nuggets will finish this year. And we talk about those teams. We talk about if we think the Timberwolves may be taking a step back after two straight trips to the Western Conference Finals. We also touch on the long-term directions of Portland and Utah. So a ton of interesting storylines, big storylines and niche ones. Thanks so much for tuning in. The best way to support the show, as always, is to hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on your podcast app to get the show every week. Let's jump in. All right, really excited to have both of you guys here for our Northwest Division preview. I consider both of you guys two of the very top authorities on the teams that you cover, two of the teams that we're about to talk about, probably the most important teams in this division that we're about to talk about. We have, of course, Adam Mares from DNVR Sports. You cover the NBA and Denver Nuggets. And then Andrew Schlecht from The Athletic. You cover the Oklahoma City Thunder and the NBA with the Athletic NBA Daily Show. And Schlecht, I want to start with you because you're coming fresh off of this championship run. And like I said, you are number one authority on your team, in touch with the pulse of the fan base. What's it been like coming off of the franchise's first championship?
It has been such a fun experience watching not only the players win and the coaching staff and seeing Sam Presti, be so excited after winning it. But man, just knowing that like this fan base had been through so many iterations of the Thunder that had these lofty expectations that they never actually got there. Watching the confetti fall, like I'm standing at midcourt, like I'm a few rows up, I'm like out of my media seat immediately. And I'm like, I just want to soak in all of this. And so I'm, standing kind of in the middle of everything and watching the confetti fall. I'm like, oh, it actually happened. Like this really happened. And just, seeing the guys on social media taking the Larry O.B. across the world has been really cool. But, just seeing everything that, Presti's been able to accomplish throughout his entire career and finally getting the thing that everybody wants, the title, I think is probably the coolest thing, because you run through the list of players that have put on a Thunder jersey and it's pretty wild with the short amount of time that they've actually had a team here. And people would always say Stephen A. Smith would just like randomly bring it up. It's like, well, look at all these players they've got and they've never won the whole thing. And so now for them to do it with this iteration of the team has been, it's been really, really exciting. And for somebody that grew up in OKC too, I'm an OKC native. I grew up here, never imagined an NBA team would be here, let alone a championship parade. It's been a dream come true for so many.
How was the parade?
It was super fun, man. It was a wild day. And it's different for me because I'm covering it and like trying to like take in the vibe. And, I take my wife and my kids to the parade too. And so like, they're trying to just enjoy it as fans and I'm trying to enjoy it while also like taking it in a different perspective. But it was glorious. It was fun. I mean, like what else is in a championship parade,
Right.
This is why it's funny that you say though that you were covering it, so it had to be a certain way. Like, isn't the experience of the parade the coverage? So you're not like studying it like Jane Goodall. It's like, no, what does it feel like to go crazy during this parade?
Well, and I say that like I'm like making video content. Like during it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So like there's like that aspect where I'm thinking, okay, what's a good angle? Where are we gonna like who's good to get? Those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about during it. So it was just it was a little bit different, but boy, it was amazing. Like all right, so
that's the best.
Well, I wanted to bring that up, Adam, because you're smiling. I'm wondering if you're smiling for your friend Schlecht over here, if you're smiling because you're remembering your own experience from a couple of years ago of Denver winning it all.
Yeah, no, I'm smiling because it's September. Time to move on, Schlecht. Championship parade's over, brother.
Well, how soon does that wear off? Because it's been 2 years since the Nuggets won the championship, and it already feels like impatience, pining over the next one. What's going to happen next? When are we going to get back there? It just, in the immediacy of the culture that we live in, without zooming out too broadly here, that is a real thing. You could probably advise them a little bit on how quickly this wears off.
I mean, it's the first brutal loss. So if you remember, Nuggets in 2024 losing Game 7 on their home floor to Minnesota, and it was like immediately you're like, dang, satisfaction gone.
Yeah.
Now it's all about what happens next. So it is true. I mean, that's what, but the cliches are true when you experience them. It's not the destination, it's the journey. And like, Schlecht is basking in the afterglow of the journey that brought him here, not just this team, but all of the different ones. And it's great. And then the new journey begins, and, enjoy that part too, because it all kind of waxes and wanes.
Well, it's a great way to jump into our conversation today. So we are talking about the Northwest Division. Reminder for the audience, we're going to review each team's offseason. We're going to talk about who got better, who got worse. We're going to highlight some of the individual players who are most interesting to us. And then at the end, we're going to make some predictions. But as a reminder also, here's how the division finished last season. The Thunder won 68 games. They were in first place. The Nuggets came in second place with 50 wins. Minnesota, 49 wins. We're in third place. And then you have Portland and Utah at the end here. Obviously, the Thunder go on to win the championship, as we talked about. Let's talk a little bit about the Thunder's offseason first, in terms of who got better, who got worse. And reigning champs, I think it's safe to say they pretty much stayed the same. They draft Thomas Sorber in the first round, tears his ACL. He'll be out for the season. They do add Nikola Topic. I don't know if we want to have that conversation now to lead off the show, but maybe we do. But Schlecht, I mean, pretty much we're looking at a Thunder team that's relatively the same, unless you feel differently. Do you feel like maybe they got better or worse for some reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the Thunder is that they got better because they're a year older, and that will happen for a few years here with them, because they have all these guys that are, in their pre-prime age, including Jalen Williams and Chet. Shea's like entering his prime. Lou Dort's entering his prime. Like, you have all these guys that are still so young that they're going to get better just because of age. And so the roster's not very different. The Topic thing is interesting for sure, for a lot of reasons. But I do think like they're going to be better. AJ Mitchell's another one who was out, the second half of the season and had a just random appearance in the NBA Finals. But I think that he's a guy that they think will be a contributor on a nightly basis. But yeah, I think that they're mostly the same.
Well, what do you think is there to gain from winning the championship in terms of improving as a team? Because obviously we saw Jalen Williams take a step up, right? And the finals that he has was amazing. I would maybe argue that coaching is the thing that could take the biggest step up. And I know we're talking about a guy who has a Coach of the Year award, has an NBA final championship already, but I think Dagnall's coaching was under scrutiny for good reason during the finals, particularly at the first half of that series. What do you think he's learned from it? And what do you think the team has learned from that they can actually build on?
Yeah. Adam knows good and well some of these things that were done during the playoffs. It's game one of the Denver series is a death by 1,000 cuts for the Thunder that they did themselves. Like, it was so bad. Like, we've seen that NBA game hundreds of times. We've all watched a ton of NBA games where a team is leading and they're just kind of bleeding points down the stretch, but they have a big enough lead where they're not going to lose the game. And that's how that game was going until it didn't. And Aaron Gordon hits that shot. And I think like that was like the life that the Nuggets needed to believe that they could beat the Thunder in that series. That all of those were preventable. Like, almost everything that happened down the stretch of that game was preventable. And I think that like, learning from those mistakes, you're fouling up 3 in the backcourt and like not letting any time come off the clock. I think it's those little things. And Mark, after the game, like, he took ownership of that moment and said that the guys did what he told them to do. And so I do think that there will be improvement there. And some of it is too, it's a very young team. It's the youngest team to win the title since that Blazers team in the 70s. I mean, it's unusual for guys at this age to get to that level. And there were a lot of mistakes that were made throughout the playoffs that a lot of people don't remember, just because when you win the title, everything bad just it's gone. But there were a lot of things that they could clean up. Like that wasn't the best version of them. Like offensively, they weren't nearly as good as they were in the regular season. Some of that's how the playoffs go, but some of it is like they're young and inexperienced. And so I do think that having all of that collective experience together, knowing that they can do it, and just cleaning up these like mistakes that could have been very costly, to them. I think that those are things that they can learn from and get better at for sure.
I have a perspective on this that might be a little controversial, but I think that Oklahoma City, certainly age is going to make you better, right? These guys all get a little bit marginally better at the things that they do. I think their style, with Shea being as high usage as he is and most of the guys around, there is a little bit of a diminishing return, in my opinion, going forward of this. Like, even as the role players or the other guys get better, their usage probably won't go up. And if it does go up, why? Giving it to Shea already works. So it's a little bit of in one hand out the other. So I think that's one thing that limits them. Plus, by the way, 68 wins. Like, how much higher can you go, right? Are you telling me they're gonna be better next year and win 70 games? There's almost feels like there's a cap on that aspect of it. Where I do think they can get better is in two things. One, they played the Pacers and the Nuggets and went 7. Both of those teams, the challenge of beating them is that they're both so adaptable. They can do a bunch of different things. And to me, that's what the playoffs are about, is pushing you towards adaptability. And the fact that they got a PhD in that twice, once from Denver and once from Indiana, that does carry over, in my opinion. That carries over into the next season, where it's like, we understand that the challenge is our ability to adapt. And we now have experience over 14 games against 2 elite teams at doing that. So that part will carry over, I think. And then the most tangible part, in my opinion, of where they're going to be different or better this year is that I think Chet Holmgren, because of his injury, really limited his own creation and his own ability to do things. Like, that was my big note in the first 5. How many games till he got hurt? It was only a couple, right? Like
10
games. I was so shocked at how well he put the ball on the floor and how versatile that made them against certain teams. Like, if you didn't have a big that could do that, then you can give the ball to Chet and he's going to break them down off the dribble, get to the cup and score. That gives them an extra layer of their own variability. And when he got hurt, I just thought they pocketed that. It was like, okay, maybe this year we're not going to be able to really explore that to the degree that is going to be most valuable to us. I think this year they will. And we'll feel it. It'll be a thing where it's like, hey, Shea still works. You can get 68 wins, you Shea at that high usage. But in other moments, we can go to Chet. Obviously, J-Dub is another guy you go to, but that's already established. But Chet, you go to him, and I just think he's going to be able to put a pressure on a defense that is new.
Yeah, he wasn't healthy like in the playoffs. The injury that he had is like really not in the NBA database, like a cracked iliac wing of his hip, and which the only thing you can do is nothing. And he was bedridden for a long time. And the atrophy that happens in your legs when you don't do anything with your legs is significant. And in my mind, there's no way he had gotten back the strength that he needed by the time that he was back, and certainly by the playoffs. And I think that this offseason, being devoted to getting that strength back and gaining more of it, I think will help him a lot. I think that's a huge reason why we saw a regression from him in the playoffs. And I think you're right. Like, hey, like he was also having to come in and play with Isaiah Hartenstein, which he had never done before. He'd never played with another like starting big before, and them figuring that out, I think, is a piece of that puzzle as well. But he did a great job as a guy that really could have been the focal point of an NBA team coming into the league, and being the number 2 overall pick. The role that he played was perfect for them, down the stretch. And so hopefully he feels, back to his old self by the start of the season. And I do think that that's a good call. I think that he is going to progress.
Yeah, Adam, I want to hop on what you were talking about, because I kind of see what you're saying there, because you would hear all the time before the playoffs or during the playoffs, interview former player, why can't the Thunder win the whole thing? Well, they don't have the experience. They don't know what it takes to win yet, and all these things. And then, of course, the Thunder shut them up by winning the whole thing. But I do think that part of that was true, even though some of us kind of roll our eyes at some of that stuff, where it's like, This team was just so overwhelmingly talented. I think it's true that they didn't know how to win, and then they figured out, to your point, how to win while doing it. Like they did get the PhD from Denver, and they did get the PhD from the Pacers. Like they kind of figured it out while they were doing it and won the championship, and deserve a ton of credit for that. But I almost think because of that, now they have the proof of concept, and now nobody can tell them that they don't know how to win because they now know how to win. They know that tricky balance of saying, we got to be true to our identity. We got to be true to what brought us here. But we also have to figure out where we're willing to bend and where we're willing to adapt. And I hinted at it before, but like Dagnall switching up his starting lineup to start the finals. Maybe went a little bit too far in the adaptability part of it, right? And then he kind of found equilibrium midway through that series. And I think you can use a bunch of different examples throughout the entire postseason run. Well, they did it. They did that part now. Like they kind of understand that balance of adaptability versus staying true to yourself. And I think that just makes you, when you have that proof of concept, so much more confident. So whether they win 68 wins, 60 wins, 56 wins, it doesn't really matter. I do think holistically they'll be better for when the games really matter in the playoffs. And that's freaking terrifying because they were so good last year. The Chet thing, again, I don't want to disrespect anybody, and I almost mean this as a compliment. He's almost overrated at this point for a guy who averaged 15, 8, and 2 last year. Like, everybody knows what this guy is capable of, but what he actually did was important, but it wasn't like people are acting like this guy's like a bona fide like all NBA guy already. I'm like, he averaged 15, 8, and 2.
I'll take the opposite perspective on this, and part of it is he's injured so much, and the injuries have been so high profile. So is it flukes or is it a sign of things to come? That's the big question I have. But I think those injuries have disguised how impactful this guy is. Personally, I just think that his defense
we agree.
already,
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, his defense was incredible, and his offense is so dynamic. And one of the things I respect about the Thunder as a whole, and Chet in particular, who I think is maybe the best example of this, is he actually has more to his game than he shows. But he understands that in this role, this was what was going to work. And that's why I say 10 games, they were giving him the ball. They were letting him ISO. They were saying, hey, we're making you like 1B in some ways. Like Shea gets to do what he does, but we're going to let you do. And when he got hurt and missed all that time, he came back and it was like, hey, we can't do that anymore. We need you to go back to doing this. And he did it, seemingly without protest. And that's impressive to me, but it also tells me that there is that more there. And now you get the summer and you come into training camp and they're going to open up that layer. So I'll take the other side of this and say that that's the biggest area where I think the Thunder are actually better than they seem. But at the same time, as I said, they were a 68-win team that had 2 Game 7s. And I think that part is also true of them. I think they are a better regular season team by their own design than they are a playoff team. Now, they were good enough to be the best at both, so that this is hardly a knock on them. But I do think that it's hard to be better in the regular season. I think they'll be marginally better in the playoffs.
So, like, I want to talk about their defense because it was historic. We haven't really talked about it so far. The steal rates, everything that they were able to do on that end. How sticky is that to you, or how repeatable is that to you? Whether or not they break steal records or not, but just that level of dominance.
Yeah, I think it's very repeatable. I mean, they had a lot of injuries during the course of last season, and they were able to maintain it with lots of different guys, and that's mostly because all of these guys have similar mentalities, and the fact that they've collected all these point of attack defenders, where as like Thunder fans are seeing them assemble this team. They had Dort, but then they draft Case and Wallace. Like, well, I guess that means Dort's gone, and then they keep both of them, and then they trade Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. Like, well, I guess that means Dort's gone. Actually, it doesn't mean that. It means that they have all three, and they find ways to use all of them. And I think that is an interesting blueprint for this particular defense and for other teams. Is like, yeah, you can kind of get a lot of these guys, and as long as they fit into what you want to do offensively, they're extremely
It's almost like
useful.
3-point shooters, right? Now, it used to be 10 years ago, you just had one guy who came off your bench and that was your sniper. And now you can't, right? You can never have too many 3-point shooters. You hear that all the time. Maybe now you can't have too many point of attack defenders.
Yeah, and I think the thing that the Thunder have kind of identified within that is they don't really have like a 6'8" wing, which is, I think, is what a lot of people think of. So in order to have a great defense, then you need to have, great point of attack defense, a great, rim protector, and then like the 6'8" versatile guy.
Scottie Pippen.
Yeah, but what they found is that guys like Alex Caruso defend wings better than a lot of the 6'8" guys do. and defend like bigger forwards better than the 6'8" guys do. They think they found out with Lou Dort as well, and the same with Casey Wallace, is that they can put these smaller guys on these bigger guys, and it is just as effective, if not more effective.
There's two reasons. I'm going to interject here because I feel passionately about this. There's two things that are afforded to you when you are a little tiny guy playing that style. One is the speed, and this is what they do. They rotate. I mean, when we talked about adaptability, I think their offense, it doesn't have that much more to go because of the style. It kind of does what it does, and it's effective every time. But their defense is so versatile. They're so fast, and they can play all these different coverages, and they're smart, and they're connected. And the speed replaces the size that you're talking about, and they are so fast, including Caruso. And the second thing is, guys giving up 100 pounds are just afforded 3 times the amount of physicality, and they know that and use it to their advantage. Lou Dort uses it to his advantage. Caruso uses it to his advantage. They play a style that puts themselves in position to draw fouls, and we'll see if the league adjusts to it. I don't think they will, because I think the league kind of enjoys it.
Yeah, I think that they'll continue to get better defensively too. I mean, Jalen Williams is probably that 6'8" guy I was talking about. He's not 6'8", but he guards and did guard 1 through 5 throughout the season and made the all defense second team. And as he gets stronger and more experienced, I think he's a guy that will get better. And then Chet, the thing that is special and all NBA about Chet is the defense. I mean, I think teams shot 54% at the rim whenever he was the closest defender last year. I mean, that's an absurd number. So I think that he's probably there are probably parts of his game that are overrated. I think his defense is still probably underrated. And a lot of it is just the way he looks. Like, you look at the guy and you're like, that guy's stopping all these NBA guys from getting to the hoop. Like, no way, no chance. Like, he's too skinny. Get him a cheeseburger. Like, you hear all these things about Chet. But then you go look at the stats, you actually watch him play. You're like, wow, like, he is that to me is the most special thing about him is the rim defense, is that there are very few guys in the league that can defend the rim like he does.
I think in terms of young defenders, it's obviously Victor Wembanyama, and then it's Chet and Evan Mobley, who won Defensive Player of the Year last year. And I think all of these guys are right there. I'm with you 100%. I think his defense is underrated. He did get pushed around a little bit, but at the same time, he doesn't, when he's not getting pushed around with his length, he's sort of enveloping guys. Like, as many times as Jokic, for instance, like, kind of shoved him around under the basket. There were also times where Chet blocked him, right? There was times where Chet had an impact. And, obviously what he could do on the weak side as a help defender is huge, especially when Hartenstein is in the game and stuff like that. Chet, because the availability last year wasn't really talked about in Defensive Player of the Year. He was, I thought, maybe 2 years ago, more in that conversation, but we're probably a couple years away. Maybe it's as soon as this year as him kind of entering that quote unquote perennial Defensive Player of the Year caliber type guy, which is a label we only really apply to half a dozen guys in the league right now. Like, even guys like Draymond and Kawhi are not even really in that conversation anymore because they aged out of it. I think Chet is probably next up in that one. Adam, let's talk about the team you cover, the Denver Nuggets. They got better, right?
I think they got a lot better. I think their offseason went as well as you could have possibly imagined. I was worried going into the offseason that the ride might be over for them because they were kind of backed into a corner. But turning Michael Porter Jr. not only into Cam Johnson but into this flexibility is huge. And here's the biggest thing. The Jokic, unlike the Thunder, and the Thunder, there are a lot of teams that play that way. The James Harden style, one guy is the offense, everybody else is kind of spread out. Denver is the collaborative team. Like, they're best because it's 5 guys all kind of doing things that are working in concert. And Michael Porter Jr. represented the one guy who is just so limited, both physically, but also, and more importantly, mentally, that they couldn't be too dynamic. Cam Johnson is the opposite of him. He's an extremely high IQ player. He's a very good read and react guy. He understands what's going on, and he's a willing off-ball player. Michael Porter, I always talk about, hated being in the corners. He called it the coffin corner because they go stand there and you might drag your defender and that'll help us out. And he's like, yeah, but I won't touch the ball. I'll just have to stand here. Cam Johnson loves the coffin corner. That's his favorite place to be. And so for me, Denver now has, for the first time, I think, of the Jokic era, 5 guys that I would consider high IQ guys in their starting lineup. And I think we're going to see and experience that as the season goes on. But more importantly, we all know this. Denver's depth last year was Russell Westbrook. He was the only player off the bench that they could play, and he came with his own baggage. Now Tim Hardaway Jr. I think adds a valuable depth piece. I think Valanciunas, probably not a playoff depth piece, to be honest with you, but Jokic played 37 minutes a game last year, his highest in his career, which I think affected him down the stretch of the playoffs. That he represents the opportunity for Jokic not to do that and hopefully to take some games off. And then we'll see if Bruce Brown has anything left in the tank, as well as guys like Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther. They enter their 4th and 3rd years, which you hope that it gains some playoff experience, and hopefully they're a little bit better this year. So Denver went from having one guy who was a flawed player off their bench to 4, 5 guys off the bench that you hope will be playoff caliber players. And then their starting lineup to me is the best they've had of the Jokic era.
So, what did you think about the Cam Johnson trade? Because that's really the headliner here. They move MPJ and that first-round pick. They get Johnson. They acquire some flexibility with it. There were some detractors to that trade. Like there's some people saying that they maybe gave up too much for maybe a marginal upgrade, if that, in Cam Johnson. What did you think of the deal?
Yeah, I think that on its surface, they're pretty similar players, but I do hear what Mars is saying. I think offensively they'll certainly be better. I think rebounding wise is something that I'll be interested to see, because that is something that MPJ is he's a better rebounder. And defensively, I'm just interested to see what it looks like. I think offensively it's a clear upgrade. I think he's going to fit in really well with what Denver likes to do offensively. It's just defensively, what does that look like? And I really have that question about all the guys that they acquired. I think that, yes, they've made big upgrades, but when you get to the playoffs, when you're in the middle of March, you're looking at your roster like, oh, we have all these guys that we can count on, 1 through 12. I think all of them can play in the playoffs. Then when you really get to the playoffs, even for the teams that have the most depth, you're like, I think we got 7.
Yeah. The number gets tiny.
And so I just wonder, like I'm with you, like Valanciunas, like the Thunder have played Jonas Valanciunas off the court in a playoff series already. Like, I think that a lot of teams will do that. I think it's a huge swing piece for them if Tim Hardaway Jr. can play in the playoffs. Like, I think that is a massive swing piece for them. Just having like reliable shooting from him, and if he can be a playoff caliber player, I think it's huge. I also think that looking at the younger guys on the team, somebody's got to pop, right? Like, somebody needs to pop, whether that's like Deron Holmes comes back and like Deron Holmes can play minutes for this team. He's actually good. Or Peyton Watson takes a step up on the offensive end. Pickett.
That's my guy.
Whoever it is, like, somebody needs to pop. I think probably like the ceiling of this team might be more about one of those guys popping than it is necessarily about these other guys that they acquired, even though we know their names already. And I think it's exciting. Like, oh, well, I know Jonas Valanciunas. I know Tim Hardaway Jr. I think the more it would be more impactful to me if Peyton Watson took a step forward, or if Julian Strawther took a step forward. Like, one of those guys taking a step forward could end up being more impactful in my mind.
I think that's actually, and I've told people this before, Peyton Watson is the biggest X factor for that reason, because I think Denver got a regular season upgrade. And playoffs, I think their starting lineup is an upgrade, but their bench is still the question mark about, to your point, 10 guys that got you through the regular season, but how many of those are playoff guys? None of them are defenders. Tim Hardaway Jr., I think, will play in the playoffs just because he's a veteran, but he'll be a weakness on defense. So now you need to make sure you have defensive players. Really, the only realistic one is Peyton Watson. And maybe Jalen Pickett, who I'm a big believer in, but we can just kind of push him to the side. The thing that Denver had, though, that gives me a little bit more confidence, though, they have an open roster spot, which they're keeping open for a reason. And they finally have some tradable assets. I mean, Julian Strawther, as much as he represents a long-term flexibility for the team, if you're in position to win it this year, that's a tradable piece to pick up a veteran defender, to say, okay, well, who out there can give us a 7th defender, which is what we need for the playoffs.
Yeah.
And Deron Holmes represents that same thing. So they have some guys that would be tough to part with. But if it comes down to your championship odds going up this year, you have an open roster spot and some young players that you can trade to get that guy.
The name that I have circled for Denver, you'll like this one, Adam. Haywood Highsmith, who the Heat just traded to Brooklyn. He's not going to be in Brooklyn by the end of the season. I think that's sort of like a perfect guy for them to go grab. He's a guy who's very happy to sit in the coffin corner, shoot 40% from 3 and guard up a few positions. But to the Cam Johnson point, I'm so interested to see what this looks like offensively, because even if you think Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Johnson are, let's just say that you think that they're the same offensively, right? MPJ, knockdown shooter, Cam Johnson, whatever. Let's also remember, baked into that sameness is a 20, 30, 40% boost from playing with Jokic, which is what MPJ had the last few years. And then Cam Johnson doing whatever the opposite of playing with Jokic is in Brooklyn is essentially what he'd been doing the last couple of years. Like if the Jokic effect is real, which we all know that it is, then I think Cam Johnson will look even better than he ever has. I'm really intrigued to see how Edelman will use like the movement shooting part of Cam Johnson's game. Will he stick him in the corner like he did with MPJ and say, hey, we need to space the floor and we'll let our two-man game dominate the middle of the floor? Or will he kind of tap into some of that stuff that Cam Johnson can do as a movement shooter? Cam Johnson also much better decision maker with the ball in his hands, better passer than MPJ is. Will they include some variations of sets where they get him involved a little bit more as a playmaker? I just think that there's a lot more versatility with Cam Johnson than there was MPJ that I'm really interested to see how Edelman taps into that. Now, obviously as the full-time coach, full training camp opportunity to maybe add some stuff to the playbook.
Well, think about this. You couldn't use Michael Porter as a screener for one, because he has like a size 24 waist. He's just so skinny that, and then number two, he has his 3 back surgeries. Right. He can't make repeated contact in a game. So he was almost never used as a screener. And when he was, it was a pointless action. So now you have a guy in Cam Johnson who's a regular bodied NBA player with Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, who they use as a screener a lot, Christian Brown, who's a big-bodied guy. And I just think it allows Denver now to run all of their offense as opposed to having to limit it with Michael Porter. And then, like I said, the big thing is just that Michael Porter frustrated the team because of his inability to read the court. And they're a read-and-react offense. So you were playing with 4 guys that could read and react and one guy that had – Michael Porter was among, like in the 98th percentile in points per possession in ATOs coming out of a timeout. Because when you script it, he could execute it. But every other time it was like, hey man, you're supposed to cut here. This is that guy jumped out on the screen, so you cut back door, and he just never saw it. Cam Johnson will.
Better podcaster too.
I love the Tim Hardaway Jr. edition. I love it so much. I'm probably guilty of being too big of a fan. I just love guys who doesn't matter how many minutes you play. I know that I could just sub you in, and I know that you have a pretty high likelihood of hitting this open 3. He shot 37% on catch and shoot threes last year. Could be better. Will be better, right? Playing, I think, in Denver. I love the Valanciunas piece as a regular season addition. I just think that, and we all know this, like having a guy like Valanciunas, we know what his limitations are in the playoffs. Those guys are still super valuable in the regular season. These guys who play minutes are built like brick houses, have like a snot factor about them, like care about games in December. Like that guy, those things are really valuable through the course of regular season. And having him just soaking up, I don't know, Adam, 15 minutes a game off the bench, whatever they need him to do, like that's hugely important.
Well, here's the real thing, man. Last year against the Thunder, this is one of the best defenses we've ever seen. Denver had one shooter. It was Jamal Murray, the guy with the ball in his hand. Michael Porter had one arm. He made 9 3-pointers in 7 games, averaged 7 points a game. There was just no penalty to great defenses swarming Jokic inside. And teams knew it, and they said, hey, we're just going to not let him have anything, inside, and he's going to have to pass to these guys, and who is going to make the shots? And the answer was no one. And you saw that in that series. Nobody went off from 3-point. Nobody made their threes in that series, Michael Porter namely. So he represents to me. Julian Strawther, by the way, won them a game. Julian Strawther, who wasn't expected to play, came in and had one game where he shot, and the Nuggets won.
Yep.
So now you add a guy who you would expect to do that regularly in a series. It does come with defensive compromises. But the other thing that I think Denver learned in the playoffs last year, they played a lot of zone and were pretty effective at it. And I don't think they have hopes of being this elite defensive team even in the playoffs. I think they can be unstoppable. Even with the limited team they had against the best defense in the league, they still were able to score at a good enough rate to make it competitive. And I think they look at that and say, what would happen if we had some shooters? And our zone probably is going to work with Tim Hardaway the same way it worked with Julian Strawther and Michael Porter.
So those are the 2 teams that we agree got better, which is a scary thing for the rest of the league because those are 2 of the better teams, and obviously one of them the champion in the league there. For the rest of the division, I think it's a little bit more difficult. Let's talk about the Timberwolves coming off of 2 straight appearances in the Western Conference Finals. They re-signed Naz Reid and Julius Randle. They add nobody really, Joan Behringer in the first round. They added Johnny Juzang. They lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luka Garza, and Josh Minott. They're worse on paper, right? Like, they're worse on paper if you just look at who they added, what they lost, especially when you consider the Gilgeous-Alexander Walker piece of it. And yet, there seems to be optimism in Minnesota. Like, Terrence Shannon could take a leap. Jalen Clark could take a leap. Anthony Edwards is only going to get better. Another year of Julius Randle there, who was horrible to start the year and then figured things out at the end of the year and then was quietly horrible again at the end of their playoff run. But worse on paper, but do we think worse in real life, Schlecht?
It really all depends on Ant, in my opinion. Like, yeah, their depth is worse. I think it's a scary proposition counting on guys like Terrence Shannon and Jalen Clark to take these really big steps up. Like, those guys were good in a pinch, but when you saw a lot of Terrence Shannon, you're like, oh, like, I get it. Like, I get why he's not playing a lot of minutes. Like, there's a lot of like decision-making things with him that need to change. Mike Conley is another year older. I worry about his durability during the season. But if Anthony Edwards can take another step up, and you hear some of the offseason stuff about him being completely off social media and seeing the difference from the Thunder to the Wolves, and he talked about it a lot, very openly, after these losses to the Thunder, that like there are a lot of things that they need to improve at. If he can get better, I think this team can continue to progress. But I do worry about like his supporting cast moving forward. Like what are the, and this is more of a big picture question than a this season question. Like, what are the Timberwolves supposed to look like in 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Like who are the guys that are growing with him? Like, who is his running mate in 3 years? Like, are we supposed to believe that's Julius Randle? Are we supposed to believe that's, Rudy Gobert is in year 12? Like, I just don't know what is supposed to happen moving forward with this franchise. As far as this year, I think they're going to be a good team in the mix. I think that depending on who their matchup is in the playoffs, they'll have another chance to win a round or two. But as far as like contender status, I think that they've taken a step back. Nickeil was awesome. There were games where he was the best player on the Wolves, and losing him is a huge deal. And thinking that you can just replace him with Terrence Shannon or Jalen Clark, I don't think that's a smart bet.
I do think a lot of it comes down to Ant, but I think the Mike Conley piece is the bigger one here. He's 38.
Yeah.
Or he'll be 38 in 3 weeks. Like, by the time the season begins, he'll be 38 years old, and he was already slowing down last year. You saw signs. Mm-hmm. And their other point guard is going to be Rob Dillingham, who is obviously unproven, but also to beyond unproven, he also has a built-in weakness that we all know. There's no denying it's his size and his ability to defend. And they were a team that was scary in large part because of their defense. Gilgeous-Alexander Walker was a part of that. So I understand the optimism, but there's a lot of times when you look at a team in the offseason and you say, if everything goes right, they could be just as good. And it's like, yeah, but not everything goes right. And a season, you expect some ups and downs. And Mike Conley at 38 years old, yeah, I expect there to be some ups and downs with that and how much you can rely on him. Rob Dillingham being young and tiny, yeah, I expect there to be some ups and downs with that. And then to your point, just the depth is not quite as solid as it had been in previous years. So I think they took a step back, same as you. In contender status, I think they took a major step back. In just how hard are they on an average night in the regular season, they're probably more or less the same. They'll be a good team, like they were last year. But I have a hard time thinking that they have 4 rounds of playoff success in them.
They still have good rim protection with Rudy Gobert there, despite his age. Like regular season rim protection, no questioning what Rudy Gobert provides you there. I think people forget just how bad Dante DiVincenzo was to start the season with them, and there was like he'll be good, right? I know, over at the Athletic, there was a big profile on Dante DiVincenzo about sort of accepting having leaving New York and being in Minnesota, and I think that was a big thing for him. And you saw him play a lot better in the second half of the year. If he's good, there's a world where he starts over Conley by the end of the season, right? Where it's just him and Anthony Edwards. But for that to happen, Anthony Edwards has to become a much more consistently good decision maker, specifically with passing the ball. Like there's just some games where he's like, oh my God, this guy looks like he could just be your point guard of the future. You can run him like James Harden with the Rockets. Like you could just have it be that. And then there's other nights where you're like, oh my God, that sounds like a terrible idea. He's just totally tunnel visioned right now with the ball in his hands. If he can get more consistent with the ball in his hands as a decision maker, I think that's huge for them. I have them worse on paper. Odds are that they won't go to the Western Conference Finals 3 years in a row, right? That's just like the odds. And I think they did have some favorable playoff matchups over the last couple of years to get that far, but they're really good. I think Schlecht brings up the really interesting point with Minnesota. What's the plan? Like, what do they look like? Like the Heat guy in me immediately thinks about like the 2005, 2006, 2007 Miami Heat, where they have young Dwayne Wade, they trade for Shaq, and they're like, okay, we're going to just be this for 2 or 3 years. And then they needed to take a real big step back for a couple of years to kind of reset things. And then obviously the Big Three era and all that stuff. And it kind of feels like maybe we're heading that direction with Ant and Gobert and Randall and whatever this is. And it feels like at some point they're going to have to take a step back to kind of reset things around what they want to look like long term. I just don't know if that step back is this year or if it's in the next couple of years. But it feels like that shoe is going to drop. I just don't know when. So that's really what I'm at with Minnesota. Should we move on to the last two teams in this division? Portland?
I think they got better.
You think they got better?
I'm going to put, they're starting from a low floor here, but I think they got better.
Can I go through their list of adds and losses?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they add Drew Holiday. They add Young Hansen. They add Damian Lillard. He's not going to play for them this year. They lose DeAndre Ayton. They lose Anthony Simons. That's really the nuts and bolts of what happened for them this offseason. I have in parentheses next to their name in my notes, IDK. I don't know. I don't know if they got better or worse, but you talk me into it.
Well, they had such a hot finish last year that the numbers might not be a better record. I mean, that's always possible, but I think they will be a better team. Whereas last year, I think they surprised a lot of people and got some wins. This year, they might get the same wins, but none of them are a surprise. They're just a tough out. And those losses, Simons and Ayton, I think to me are additions by subtractions. One, because I think one guy is kind of a loser in DeAndre Ayton. And one, Simons I like. I just don't think he fit the direction that they were going and the style of the players around him. And we saw that down the stretch last year where the team was better without him than with the guys that they retained. So I think they're going to be a really fun, dynamic, tough team. And they have two big men that are actually kind of tough matchups, So I think Young Hansen had an incredible summer league and was really fun, but I think he'll probably struggle this year and be a bit more of a novelty kind of guy. But Klingen's an interesting guy. I mean, he's enormous. He is really good defense, can really disrupt some things inside. So I just look at them and I say they might have the exact same record this year, just none of it will be a surprise. And there's a continuity factor to them. We're going to get to it a little bit later, but they liked what happened in the last 2 months of their season and committed to it in multiple ways that I just think is interesting.
Yeah, to me, I think that the Blazers have an identity this season. I think they're going to be a good defensive team. And I think that to me is the reason why I think they're better, is that they just have some version of an identity. But long term, who's the best player on the Blazers in 2 years? I don't know that anybody really knows the answer to that question.
I'd be surprised if any of the guys though are like great players, and that is one of their problems.
What if it's still Damian Lillard?
We're in a very weird spot. We're in a very weird spot if that's the case. We're in a very strange spot. Yeah, I don't mind what they did. I think bringing in Drew Holiday will be helpful to this team overall. Really, gosh, please start Scoot Henderson. Please play him. Please find out what you have. I mean, it's fine developing a guy off the bench. It is weird developing a top 3 pick off the bench, for this many years in a row and truly not knowing what you have in him. I think that you need to see like what you have in him, and Toumani Camara can help cover for him in ways that he needs. But that to me is the biggest question that you need to have it answered, because I don't think we got through last season and have a definitive answer as to what Scoot Henderson is yet.
Right. They're flirting with the Kuminga zone a little bit too much.
If you go through his third year in the league and you get to the end of the season, you still don't have a definitive answer as to what he is. That is a failure for the Blazers. You have to know what you have in him. Because I think he's a huge swing factor. If he can be anywhere close to what people thought he was, and that maybe that ship has already sailed, do we truly know that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
And that matters a lot because of where he is contractually and all these, they got to figure it out because they have some decisions that they're going to have to make. If I can make the argument that they got worse, and I'm not sure I believe this, but this is why I'm sort of on the fence. Anthony Simons was second on the team in assists. He was really high usage, really good 3-point shooter for them. That's a void that they need to fill, right? Who's going to fill in that playmaking? Maybe, and the answer might just be finally Scoot gets the ball and he just handles it. And that might be the best option. I'm just trying to make the devil's advocate case right now. He was really high usage. Who do you give that usage to that is actually productive for you? Because maybe you give it to Scoot, maybe he stinks. And you're just all right, we're not better. if the answer is Drew Holiday, I will say good luck to that. I think Drew Holiday, I know that we as a media conglomerate have decided years ago that we're never allowed to say anything bad about Drew Holiday for some reason, but like Drew Holiday started slowing down last year. I'll just leave it. And as in terms of like a lead playmaker, there's always been questions about him, right?
Yeah.
They have some good secondary ones, though. I agree with you. There's not a great lead one, but they do have like Denny Avdija can move the rock.
Yep, and it's going to be a lot of sort of by committee, which always makes me a little bit nervous because I'm not sure by committee works. But if they're going to get better, I think Denny had an amazing Eurobasket. I think he started taking that leap last year. There might be a bigger leap coming this upcoming season. Like, would it shock anybody if Denny was flirting with All-Star this year? I don't think it would.
All-Star would surprise me, but he's really good. If you told me, because again, when we're talking about who is the best player on this team, at least on the offensive side, there is a vacancy. Is it crazy to think it's him?
I think Klingen's really good. I think there's real good rim protection numbers stuff with him that's really interesting. Kamara is obviously sort of a hidden gem on that roster. I think they're interesting. I don't know if they got better. I don't know if they got worse. They kind of just, to me, moved some stuff around and added some talent and just players that they feel better about having in that locker room, specifically with Drew and Lillard. And maybe they needed that. Maybe that's great. So good for Portland, I suppose. What do they think? What do we think their starting lineup should be? We all agree Scoot should start.
Scoot, Tumani Kamara, Denny, Jeremy Grant, and Klingen.
That's interesting. So you'd basically have, Scoot, Denny, and Kamara on the perimeter, and then Grant as your power forward and Klingen. I don't hate it. I kind of forgot that Jeremy Grant was on the roster, but that's fine.
He's there. It was not a good year for Jeremy Grant, but he is there. What do we think about Shaedon Sharpe? Do we think Shaedon should be starting? Should he be taking on a lot of minutes? Maybe instead of Jeremy Grant, you have Shaedon Sharpe in there.
I kind of like Sharpe off the bench as a sixth man with like a defined role.
That was my
where
thought too.
You just like, hey, go in there, score a bunch of points. You could do that, and he can do that. But there were times where Sharpe looked like their best player last year.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this one's tough, honestly. They're a little tough in that way.
Do you go Scoot, Drew, Denny, Kamara, Klingen, and then bring Grant off the bench?
Oh, we're just shuffling deck chairs at this point, Wes.
I guess you're right. Let's talk about the Utah Jazz. They got worse. They got worse, and they did it by design. They add, for whatever it's worth, Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love, who's probably going to get a buyout and sign somewhere else. George Niang, Yusuf Nurkic. They draft Walter Clayton Jr., who looked really good in Summer League. They lose Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, Colin Sexton, Jaden Springer, Johnny Juzang. They got worse, like I said. I think this team sucks. I find them impossible to watch. There's not much that I care about on this team outside of who do they trade Larry Markin into in February. To me, it's starting to border on levels of if they were in Philadelphia, the league would have stepped in. It's starting to get to that level with Utah, with them. It's kind of embarrassing.
But they have so many assets, Wes. I'll tell you, though, there's two things that are interesting to them about for me. One is I think Lauri Markkanen is underrated. It's rare that a player this good has spent this much of his career on nothing but rebuilding teams. It's kind of crazy.
It was refreshing to watch him play for a team that actually cares about winning in Finland. Yeah.
And he's just so good, man. I mean, he is like the S-tier version of this mold of player that everybody wants because he can do a bunch of stuff, but he doesn't force it, and he's efficient, and he can shoot, and he can drive. So I think he's incredible, and yes, where he winds up would be a storyline, and I kind of have a sneaky suspicion it's going to be Utah because that would be the dumbest thing that could happen. But the other guy that I'm sneaky high on this roster is Kyle Filipowski. I actually think he's was sneaky good last year, and when we look at their young players, and they got Walter Clayton, who I really like, and Ace Bailey, who has all that upside, and some of these other names, I look at it and I go, I don't think Kyle Filipowski's an all-star. But I think he's pretty good. I think he has like more of a higher floor than a lot of the guys that are these more intriguing players. So that's it. I'm out of things that I find interesting about him.
You went pretty long there, so I'm impressed.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that we are at this point in the rebuild with the Jazz. And how would you rank the guys that they have drafted over the last like 3 years? Like where would you rank these guys?
In terms of like what they are on an NBA roster? I think
no, versus each other. Like how would you rate
I
them?
see.
Like guys that
Wow,
you
that's
like.
a great question. I think Kessler at the top.
Okay. we're done here. Like, this is the point. Like,
Is
right,
Isaiah Collier number 2? Like, that's
right.
kind of crazy because he
Yeah.
wasn't very good.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of my point. Is like they really, really need Ace Bailey to be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like they really need him to be good because they have not truly hit on somebody. Like, yeah, Kessler's good. They got him in a trade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Taylor Hendricks has been injured. Maybe he can show something this year. Filipowski, I agree, is shown to be like a rotation big, but is he a starter? Probably not. It's bleak. Like Keontae George has probably shown the most of anybody, but he's like the archetype of player that you watch him and like, you know that he's the somebody has to score the points kind of guy. You know, every NBA team's going to score over 100 points a game, and somebody has to score them. And I feel like we've gotten to a point with this Jazz roster and that, yeah, some of these guys are putting up numbers, but like, do we believe in any of them? I think there's a couple of them, but we're talking about role players. We're talking about potentially like a fifth starter at best for a couple of these guys. And then the rest of them, it's still a huge question mark. So I like that they have cleared the way for these guys and that they're going to spend the season figuring it out. But they desperately need Ace Bailey to be good, and they desperately need the lottery to go their way.
Right.
Like those are the two things that would show success to me for the Jazz this year is Ace Bailey can start and he's good, and we get a top 3 pick in the draft.
And that's why I kind of joked that the NBA is close to having step in here because Jazz fans will just tell you, oh, the only reason we're this bad is because of bad lottery luck. And my argument would be, well, you kind of screwed yourself when your entire team building strategy was relying on ping pong balls. Like that's a tough strategy. And you kind of parked yourself in this corner. Some of it's true, right? Like they didn't have the best lottery luck. They really took a plunge last year. They're really trying to take a plunge this year because you could also argue for those first couple of years of the rebuild, they were better record-wise than what they expected to be too, and maybe that hurt them. They are designing to lose on purpose. I just don't know how much longer they could survive this. The other way that they can get out of this is if they trade Larry Markkinen for real stuff. If they turn Larry Markkinen into real assets that help them in that rebuild, that's another kind of tool in the toolbox for them moving forward. All right, let's move on with our next segment. Just a move, could be a pick, a trade, a signing, an extension, anything that jumps out to you for whatever reason. Adam,
yeah.
Anything that we could even be something we already talked about that we want to go more in depth in if you want.
So I think on your list, the next one was new additions. And so I wanted to kind of keep what I typically would have answered here for that segment. But I'll say Chauncey Billups being signed to an extension. That happened really early. But if we would have gone back to December or November of last year and said, hey, that they're going to build around Chauncey Billups' vision of this team, I think everybody would have been like, what? I felt like he was for sure just playing out the clock. But to me, it's important because it signals that Portland is buying into the direction that the team is going. So whether that or not that's the right move, to me, it was the one that stood out the most because I did not expect it several months prior.
Yeah, this isn't technically a new addition. You mentioned it off the top, but I do think we should talk about Nikola Topic just because I think that he's this weird piece for the Thunder. And if you look and you think back about the playoffs, there were certainly moments during the playoffs where they needed like another ball handler, like a guy that could make decisions off the bounce. And he does that, but he also doesn't fit the mold of every other guard on the Thunder, and that he's not like some tenacious defender. And he might be a minus defender and probably will be to start his career. And he kind of needs the ball in his hands. It's how he was the most effective kind of player. And they may ask him to not do that. At points, Josh Giddey was asked to do the two things that he was worst at is sit on the perimeter and catch and shoot threes and then be a defender. And it's like, well, those are his two worst attributes. And you wonder if they wind up in a situation with Topic where they're asking him to do those same things. And so I don't know how much. I think he'll certainly play this year because everybody that wears a Thunder jersey plays. That's just the way that Mark Daigneault does his rotations in the regular season. But learning what kind of NBA player he is this year, I think will be really interesting because there's a lot of really good things about him too. Like he can really find angles and get to the hoop. He's got really great touch around the rim. He's probably steps in and is probably a top 2 or 3 passer on the team right away. Those are a lot of good attributes about him, but he is definitely an interesting piece for the Thunder that is not super easy to like make a judgment of how he'll fit.
I think he's fascinating in another way. AJ Mitchell's really good and does the things.
AJ's good.
So, and I almost feel those two guys. I mean, look, Dagnott, to your point, plays everyone better than any other coach in the regular season. He finds ways to develop 14 guys at the same time, which is maybe the most impressive trait of the Thunder. So he'll probably be able to do it. But there's a part of me that looks at that and says, to your point, Topic represents a stylistic change. As good as he is, it means the team would change their personality to make it work. I love AJ Mitchell. He seemed to fit in without having to do that. And I almost wonder if it's like, is there going to be a pecking order there that's a little bit strange? Between those two guys, I'm saying, like, how much do you invest in Topic, who has a higher upside, versus AJ Mitchell, who I think allows you just to keep winning games and playing the way that you're playing?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think I think that we'll probably end up with AJ's playing in the playoffs and Topic is sitting is where I think we'll land. But seeing how that looks throughout the regular season is a whole other question. And really the success of both of those guys could really help this team in the future, thinking about the second apron and all of that for them. Like they're going to have big decisions to make. And if one or both of those guys are true rotation pieces and guys you can play in the playoffs, then yeah, we can probably trade Isaiah Joe into somebody's space, or we could trade Aaron Wiggins, or whatever you feel like you need to do to kind of shave, off your cap. I think that those two guys, and potentially both, but at least one of them being like a real piece, is kind of a big deal for the Thunder.
I think betting on OKC to figure it out, though, this is the one thing I'll give them, is to me, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense, but it's like, oh, they're in a corner. I wonder how they'll wiggle out of this. Oh, there it is. And I feel like that's what's going to happen with Topic, because I don't think it makes as much sense on paper to me, but they'll probably make it work.
I'm glad we just allotted some time for AJ Mitchell talk, because I love that guy. I think he's really good.
He's so good.
He's good.
I think I probably went on like 15 minutes when I had Schlecht on like early in the season when AJ Mitchell was playing well. I was like, I love this guy. Can we start him? Is he the MVP of the team? Whatever. In terms of the development part, I think it's a great point. I also just wonder, life cycle of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Yes, they used to do a good job of developing players. They'll probably still tell you that development is really important to them. Should it be? Like, they just won the championship. They kind of know how good they are. Like, how important is developing Topic at this point? It's not as important as developing guys like Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Chet was a few years ago. And at some point, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying at some point it might happen where they just say, you know what? We don't actually have to develop this guy. It doesn't matter. We could just trade him for another more first-round picks later. Like, they always have that option, or whatever they want to do with it. Yeah.
To me, the question is, when the train is moving as fast as it is for the Thunder, because the bar to play, for a title contender is very high for any team. It is so difficult to develop while being a contender. It is really difficult, as like the Nuggets have found out too. Like, it is really tough
Thunder
to find these guys.
Though.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what it looks like. The reason they hired Mark in the beginning is the guy wakes up thinking about development. Like, that's just the way that he operates. And that's why they hired him to begin with. And he's evolved into a much better coach than what anybody would have projected. He has one of the weirder paths to the NBA of any head coach. But I am interested to see what that looks like. Now, it's easy, even for a guy they picked in the second round, Brooks Barnhizer. Like, it's much easier to see how he would fit with the team. If he can shoot it, it's very easy to see how Brooks would fit. He's a tenacious defender, good passer, flow of the offense kind of guy. That's very simple. But like, it was hard for, they developed Giddey well, I thought. But as the team evolved and became what they were, it became more apparent, like, oh, this is really difficult. But even then, they put out a press release that said that they asked Josh Giddey to come off the bench and to stay on the team. And he said no.
Yeah.
And whether we believe that or not to be the truth, that's what they said. And I tend to believe it, because they went out and drafted a guy who is probably the most similar to Josh Giddey that we can find in the last several years in the draft. So I'm interested to see what it looks like. Some Thunder fans think I hate Topic because I talk about him like this. I'm just genuinely curious as to what it looks like. And I don't really know. I just don't know what it will look like.
Here's one thing on the developmental front. I think Denver is going to shock people this year and win and contend for winning 58 games. 57. They've never won 58 games in franchise history. They're illustrious 60-year history as a franchise. They've never won 58. I think the Rockets might be really good and win 55 games. Thunder probably going to win 68 again. So this might be a situation where by Christmas they're up by 5 games in the standings, 6 games in the standings, and it's like, hey, we can afford to play some guys.
Yeah, could be.
Most impactful newcomer. We've talked a lot about these guys, so we don't have to spend a ton of time here, but just to put a name to the segment here, Adam.
To me, I mean, I'll go quick. I just think it's Cam Johnson. I think it represents an enormous...
That's who I have written down too.
Yeah. I think it is him. Like sometimes you can go back and forth on guys, but I don't think any of the other additions are guys that like jump out at you.
You could argue Valanciunas just because of where they were in terms of backup center to now in terms of regular season stuff, but I do think it's Cam Johnson.
I think Schlecht is right, though, that I just don't expect him to play in the playoffs. I mean, maybe there's a matchup or two where he can play, but I think for the most part, no. Oh, man, my camera's
there it is.
Glitching.
Yeah. So, do you have a different answer?
No, it would certainly be Cam Johnson, and then Tim Hardaway is probably the other one that I think that if he can be this like high volume 3-point shooter that can at least survive defensively, and he's a guy that you can count on coming off the bench in the playoffs, that would be a dramatically great outcome for Denver. Because watching them over the course of 7 games, like they were just grasping at straws at times with guys off the bench. They just didn't know what they were going to get from guys night in, night out. And so if you can get consistent shooting and a guy that you can at least plug into your zone, like that will be massive for them.
Final piece here. We're going to rank the teams and we're going to predict how many of them make the playoffs. So let's go ahead and rank them.
OKC is an easy number 1. If we're talking regular season, OKC easy number 1.
In terms of ranking how they finish in the standings.
I do think we should do playoffs after this, but I think OKC, Denver, Minnesota, Portland, Utah. And
last year's finish.
And I think I might lock it in. I don't even know what the most controversial, order would be. So
I guess the way to frame it, I think we all agree on that in terms of the order, right? Unless you have something different, Schlecht, but
no, I think that is like lock it in, like that's happening.
So you're saying lock it. Like, would it be surprising if somebody other than OKC won this division?
Yeah,
I think so too. But
they had a lot of injuries last year that really cost them.
Because that's really the only question. Games. That's really the only question.
I think
here.
they're as good a regular season team as you're going to see, just because of their defense and the depth of their defense. They can be great defensively every single night. Not just great, the best team defensively every single night. And then they have a really good player in Shea.
So you mentioned that you wanted to rank them playoff wise, which makes me think that you have some kind of take here, Adam, that you need to get off.
I think in the playoffs, the Nuggets are going to get them this year. I mean, this is my big hot take for the year. I've only ever predicted the Nuggets to win a championship one time in my 11 years covering them, and it was 2023. There's, I'm a little concerned with how Jokic looked at Eurobasket because he looked a little pudgy. And, with Jokic, you always wonder. That could throw everything off. I'm counting on Jokic to be the player he has been, putting up 30, 20-20s. And I think he will be. But to me, this is the best starting 5 Jokic has ever had. This is probably as good of a bench as they have ever had, and they have the flexibility to make it a playoff bench at the deadline. So I think Denver is the opposite of Oklahoma City. They've never had a 10-game win streak. They've never won more. I can't even remember what this iteration's high is, 55 wins? I can't remember what it is, but they've never had a regular season that blew you away.
Right.
But in the playoffs, people forget, in the bubble, the Clippers were the favorites, and they beat them in a 7-game series. They just are a playoff team. They figure things. They're their ultimate figure things out team, and they've had some tragic flaw in all of the years, including the championship year. I think they have fewer tragic flaws right now, and the ability to add one more defender at the deadline that would make them, in my opinion, a complete playoff team. And I just count on that. I mean, Jokic, it's funny how Jokic last year, you saw the Schlecht. I think Oklahoma City only gave up 30-point scores, I think 6 times or something like that all year, playoffs and regular season. I think Jokic was 4 of them. And think about the amount of attention he drew from them. I mean, he had no outlet, no release valve. I just think this year the Nuggets will have more release valves than they've ever had, and I'm counting on them. So that was the one difference, is I'm excited for that matchup in the playoffs again this year.
Yeah, hopefully we get it.
I know. We never do.
I know. We talk so much about this stuff like preseason and during the season. Like, can't wait for this matchup, and then like something wonky happens.
Kobe LeBron just never happening. You're like, all right.
Yeah, for real.
Yep.
Yeah.
How many of these teams make the playoffs?
Three.
I have 3. Yeah. OKC, Minnesota, Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. Last thing here. What player are we discussing differently a year from now? I have a long list. We've covered a bunch of these guys already. If I could throw a name into the mix here, I have Scoot Henderson. I just think in terms of differently, better or worse, I just think hopefully we'll know. We talked about that part of it already. Lauri Markkanen, we might just be talking about him in terms of being on a different basketball team. We mentioned the Chet Holmgren thing. He was on my list. Like, does he develop into that second option, maybe, or more of a second option, or more of an option, the way that Adam was talking about earlier? I'm glad you brought that up. I also had like who pops in Denver, right? We talked about all these things. Is there another leap for Jalen Williams to make? Like, we're already talking about him in terms of all NBA, third teamish kind of guy, right? All-star, perennial all-star type of guy. Is there like another level there for him to get to?
Yeah, to me is can he increase his volume from 3? And he has shown to be a really good shooter. You know, all of the playoffs he dealt with that injury to his wrist, and you could tell there were times where he just wouldn't even pick up the ball in a way that he was going to be a threat from 3 throughout the entire playoffs. Like, what is going on with him? And I even asked him, like, in press conferences and different settings, like, what's going on? He would never say anything, but he's icing his wrist after the game. He's, fidgeting with it all the time. He hit that corner 3 in game 5 in OKC, and he's screaming at his wrist. Like, there was clearly something going on. And so I think that, well, he had an amazing playoffs. He scored 40 in the finals, even with that bum wrist. I think if he can be healthy, I think there is another leap for him, certainly. I mean, he's the archetype of like superstar wing that we've seen over and over again throughout the history of the league. Like, he's not an unusual archetype. He was 21, 5-5 with a steal and 0.7 blocks. I think that number could increase. And it's really, to me, it's the volume of threes. He took 5 threes a game last year. I think it needs to be like 7 or 8, eventually. I don't know that he'll get there next year, but I think that's where he needs to be. He's career 38% from 3. He was 36% last year. I think he's better than that. So I think that really it's 3-point volume and then continuing to get to the free throw line, which he did a little bit better last year, did pretty well throughout the playoffs. That to me is like the line between like star and like superstar. Is like the free throw line is a huge deal. And if he can learn how to get to the free throw line, then yeah, I think we're talking about like a perennial all NBA guy.
I think this one is a tough one. I think Terrence Shannon Jr., a lot of the guys I'm going to say are already on people's lists, but he's going to get a lot of minutes this year. He's going to be a big piece, and maybe he goes a little bit more mainstream. I mentioned I like Kyle Filipowski. I could see him being, on people's radar. AJ Mitchell, we've already talked about. But based on our conversation, I'm going to go with Chet Holmgren because I just thought that this was maybe a little bit more, I don't know where I think everybody thinks of him as this good defender and does this or that. I just think the guy has an enormous amount of skill that is already developed, but just not utilized as much. He seems, by all accounts, to be a worker, a guy that enjoys working on his game and adding to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about him more as a guy that's like, yeah, that guy, if he was more higher in the pecking order on a different team, he might be pretty dynamic at that role. And even if he is the third option on Oklahoma City, it might be the best third option as an offensive go-to guy, and that's not even something they do that often. So I think Chet Holmgren's a really, really good player. And I like Jalen Williams too. I just wonder, like I said, their style of play doesn't lend itself as much, in my opinion, to a second star offensively. But Chet Holmgren, I could see being one of those guys that just gives good defensive big men a lot of points because he's a tough matchup in the way he plays.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting depth pieces in this division, too. We mentioned some of the guys in Denver, Terrence Shannon. I like Jalen Clark a lot. I think that guy's a really interesting, good, versatile defender. If he can find something to do offensively, whether it's make threes or just become a cog passer part of that offense. I think that's something that could be really interesting for Minnesota down the stretch. But guys, really appreciate it. The ultimate Northwest Division preview. Two of the best, as always, with me to help me do it. Appreciate the time, guys.
Thanks, Wes.
Do it.